She never imagined that a job offer would change her life forever. Travis thought he was just hiring a nanny for his nephews, but an unexpected secret would emerge in an ultrasound exam. Now, he needs to decide if he will accept fatherhood before it's too late. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. A sharp breeze brushed Alexandra's cheeks as she stood before the tall iron gates, clutching the worn handle of her single suitcase. The estate's grounds spread out before her like a picture from a distant dream. She inhaled deeply, trying to steady the nervous flutter in her stomach. This was more than a job. This could be her grandmother's lifeline. She pulled the latch and pushed through the gates. Each step on the gravel sounded impossibly loud, a steady crunch echoing in her ears. Despite her apprehension, the grounds were serene, with bright blossoms carefully arranged beneath tall, whispering trees. It would have been breathtaking if not for the weight of her worries. At the end of the path, two staff members in formal attire exchanged guarded looks as she approached. One silently dipped a chin in her direction before ushering her into the front foyer. Inside, the entry hall soared to a vaulted ceiling. Sunlight spilled through tinted windows, catching on a shimmering chandelier above. At first glance, the interior looked more like a museum than a home. Every surface shone, every piece of furniture seemed placed with purpose. Yet beneath the polished marble floors and hushed corridors, Alexandra sensed a tension that was hard to name. She set her suitcase down just as a kindly-faced woman wearing a tidy black dress stepped forward. "You must be Alexandra," the woman said in a gentle voice. "I'm Mrs. Rhodes, the housekeeper. Welcome." Alexandra's shoulders relaxed slightly at the warmth in Mrs. Rhodes's gaze. "It's wonderful to meet you. Thank you for having me," she managed, wishing her voice didn't tremble so obviously. Mrs. Rhodes led her out of the foyer, past tall wooden doors that appeared to guard countless secret rooms. Alexandra took in every detail: ornate wallpaper, carved banisters, the faint echo of footsteps overhead. She was struck by the hush of the place, as though someone had dimmed the volume on daily life. In the midst of that silence, a figure emerged. A man in a well-tailored suit, his posture drawn tense, as though carrying a private burden. He gave a polite nod, but the formal greeting didn't mask the weariness in his eyes. "Travis," he said simply, extending his hand. Alexandra introduced herself, aware that this was her new employer, the man whose name carried weight in business circles she'd only overheard on the news. Up close, she noticed subtle signs of sleeplessness, faint dark circles, a slight furrow in his brow. Still, he maintained a calm civility that felt oddly distant. "Mrs. Rhodes will settle you in," he said. His gaze lingered for just a second longer than expected, as if he were trying to read Alexandra's intentions, or perhaps searching for a reason to trust her. Then he nodded once more and walked off, the echo of his footsteps fading down a corridor. Mrs. Rhodes offered a small smile, a hint of sympathy crossing her face. "Come, let me show you to the children's playroom." They continued through winding halls until they reached a bright space at the rear of the mansion. Windows along one wall allowed sunlight to flood in, illuminating scattered toys and coloring books. Two young boys stood near a low table, fiddling with plastic building blocks. Their expressions were cautious, as though they'd learned to be wary of strangers. Alexandra's heart melted at once. She approached carefully, kneeling so her eyes were level with theirs, and offered a gentle greeting. The older boy gave a polite nod, muttering his name. The younger one just stared, not quite ready to speak. Although neither rushed into her arms, she sensed they were curious. She tried a reassuring smile, wondering how they had been coping since their mother's passing. She had heard only a few details. The sister of Mr. Travis had died recently, leaving him to care for the nephews. The story felt incomplete, shadowed by rumor and hush. That hush weighed on the entire household as she learned when they returned to the kitchen. Mrs. Rhodes spoke in a soft tone about Alexandra's daily duties, preparing small meals for the boys, overseeing their studies, and maintaining a steady routine. In every sentence, Alexandra caught an unspoken warning. Tread gently here, for hidden wounds lurk beneath the surface. While receiving these instructions, she heard a faint cough. A uniformed man with broad shoulders stepped into view, leaning in the doorway. He eyed Alexandra a moment before giving Mrs. Rhodes a curt nod. "That's Joe, our security," Mrs. Rhodes said quietly. "He's very protective of the children." Joe's eyes flickered, taking in Alexandra's appearance as though assessing her reliability. He said nothing, just offered a slight incline of his head before turning away. Alexandra tried not to let his coolness unnerve her, but she couldn't ignore the tension in his stance. It reminded her that in this household, trust might be earned slowly, if at all. That evening she ate dinner alone in a side room, a single chandelier illuminating a polished wooden table. The staff had already dined, and Travis was nowhere to be seen. Each bite felt lonesome, the silence around her broken only by the faint hum of distant activity. She had never felt more like an outsider than at that moment, but she reminded herself. Her grandmother needed medical treatment that Alexandra couldn't afford on her own. This job was her best chance at paying those bills, and if she had to endure an uneasy silence, so be it. After dinner, she ventured into a corridor lined with paintings, portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose lifelike eyes followed her steps. A soft sound reached her ear, like a muffled sob. She paused, heart racing, straining to hear more. It might be one of the children. She turned a corner, but the noise ceased, replaced by an almost eerie stillness. Eventually, she decided it might have been a staff member upset about something that wasn't her business. She continued until she found a narrow stairway that led to a small attic room. There, she clicked on a low lamp and saw her suitcase waiting beside a modest bed. Alone, she let her posture slump and glanced around the cramped quarters. This humble space, dusty but quiet, would be her refuge, for however long they kept her. She thought of her grandmother lying in a hospital bed, the bills accumulating. Steeling herself, she slipped out of her daytime shoes and began to unpack. Every folded shirt carried a memory of earlier struggles, nights cleaning offices for extra income, days spent juggling odd jobs. Now she had pinned her hopes on caring for 2 grieving boys in a house brimming with secrets. Just then, a soft knock startled her. She opened the door to find Mrs. Rhodes once again kindly checking on her. "You've had a long day," the housekeeper said. "Try to get some rest. Tomorrow we'll be busy with the children." Alexandra thanked her. The concern in the older woman's eyes gave her a sliver of comfort. There was some humanity in these halls, perhaps enough to carry her through the challenges ahead. Later, unable to sleep, Alexandra tiptoed down to check on the nephews. She found them both sound asleep under patterned blankets, clutching photos worn at the edges. The tender sight made her heart ache. She adjusted the younger boy's covers, careful not to wake him, and wondered what life had been like for them over these past few months. Before stepping away, she glanced at their small faces, vowing inwardly to protect them however she could. In the hallway, the distant glow of a lamp drew her toward an open balcony at the far end. At first, she was hesitant to go closer, but curiosity nudged her on. The air was cool against her skin as she approached. There, leaning against the stone balustrade, stood Travis, alone in the moonlight. He stared into the dark sky, unblinking, as if lost in a world of his own regrets. For a moment, Alexandra considered reaching out to ask if he was all right. Yet the silence was so thick, so strangely personal, that she could only watch from the shadows. His shoulders lifted slightly, as though he inhaled a heavy breath he couldn't quite release. The silver gleam of moonlight illuminated the planes of his face, hinting at more sorrow than mere exhaustion. He didn't turn around, didn't seem to notice her there. She wondered if he, too, was replaying events in his mind, his sister's tragic end, the responsibility of raising two young boys, the curiosity of a new nanny who might prove either helpful or disastrous. Feeling her heart pound, Alexandra took a step back, not wanting to intrude on the moment. She had glimpsed a depth in Travis that his formal greeting hadn't shown, something raw and unresolved that hovered just beneath the surface. It made her uneasy, yet also stirred her sympathy. She realized there was so much she didn't understand about this family, about the circumstances that brought her here. And the question lingered. Had she walked into an opportunity or a tangle of secrets that could upend her life? She swallowed hard, suddenly keenly aware of the gravity of her decision to accept this post. The mansion, the staff's guarded looks, the unspoken grief, it all pointed to some painful story waiting to unravel. Part of her wanted to run back upstairs, lock the door to her attic room and pretend she hadn't seen Travis standing there like a figure bound in chains of regret. But another part recognized that this was exactly what she'd signed up for, whether she liked it or not. She took one final look at Travis's back, then slipped down the corridor before he could notice her. Her pulse raced as she made her way through the dimly lit hallway. She wondered just how dark the secrets ran in these walls, and how her presence might stir them awake. As she reached the foot of the attic steps, she paused in the silence, drawn once more to the image of Travis gazing at the moon. A quiet realization settled over her. This was only the beginning. Alexandra stepped back quietly, heart pounding, sensing that Travis carries a hidden sorrow tied to his sister's death, and that she's on the brink of discovering far more than she bargained for. Morning light streamed through the tall windows of the mansion's ground-floor corridor, casting delicate shapes across the marble floor. Alexandra rubbed the sleep from her eyes as she made her way toward the kitchen. The memory of the previous night still lingered. Travis alone on the balcony, shoulders hunched in silent worry. She had fallen asleep wondering about his burdens and woke with the same questions on her mind. In the kitchen, Mrs. Rhodes was already at work, placing freshly baked rolls into a covered basket. She greeted Alexandra with a mild smile. "I hope you rested well, dear," she said, offering her a cup of tea. Alexandra savored the warmth of the porcelain against her palms. "I did, thank you. It's a quiet house in the early morning," she replied, noticing how the slightest noise echoed off the high ceilings. Soon the two nephews appeared, guided by a more formal maid who stepped back once they reached the threshold. The boys lingered by the doorframe. Alexandra beckoned them closer, motioning for them to join her at the long table. Their expressions were still guarded, yet curiosity had begun to bloom, especially in the older child's eyes. "Good morning," Alexandra said gently, pushing a bowl of fresh fruit toward them. "Did you sleep all right?" The younger nephew nodded, still too shy to speak. The older boy hesitated before answering, "Yes, thank you," in a small voice. He glanced sideways at Mrs. Rhodes, as if to confirm he was allowed to speak freely. Mrs. Rhodes leaned over the table, setting out utensils. "We keep a schedule for the children's morning lessons," she explained. "Normally they have reading practice right after breakfast. Then there's some time for supervised play." She paused, her gaze settling on Alexandra. "I'm sure you'll find your own rhythm with them, but do keep in mind how things have been done. The family appreciates certain standards." Alexandra nodded, absorbing the implied caution. She thanked Mrs. Rhodes, feeling a stirring of resolve to prove herself worthy of the trust placed in her. For the sake of these kids, and for her grandmother, who waited in a hospital room far away, she had to succeed here. After they finished eating, she walked the boys to a small study area off the central hallway, watching them pull out thin workbooks and pencils. She could see how easily any disruption might unsettle them, given all they had endured. As the older nephew bent over a spelling exercise, the younger fiddled with his pencil, lost in thoughts. Alexandra moved closer, offering patient guidance. Gradually, the boy began writing letters in shaky script. She praised his efforts with a bright smile, hoping each small success might help them feel more secure. But as the morning went on, Alexandra felt eyes watching her. A few times she glimpsed Joe, the security guard, hovering at the edges of her vision. He seemed to appear whenever she managed to coax a laugh from the children, as if suspicious of her motives. She tried greeting him once, but he only gave a curt nod, arms folded across his broad chest. His wariness weighed on her, though she did her best to ignore it. After the boys finished their lessons, she offered to take them outside to get some fresh air. Mrs. Rhodes appeared with a polite reminder. "Please stay within the gardens," she said, her tone measured. "The grounds are extensive and it's easy for a child to slip away." A flicker of anxiety passed across her face before she left, disappearing toward the main house. The older nephew perked up as soon as they reached the sprawling greenery. "Look, I can see the fountain!" he exclaimed, pointing to a marble sculpture standing at the center of a hedged clearing. The younger boy tagged behind, taking in the vibrant roses, the carefully trimmed topiaries, and the little gravel paths that meandered around the estate. At first, it was peaceful. The morning sun cast a pleasant warmth. Alexandra strolled beside the boys, encouraging them to name the colors of the flowers and offering praise each time they found a new shade. She felt a fleeting sense of hope. Maybe this place could become a stable environment for them if she handled everything properly. Then, without warning, the older nephew glanced backward, as though checking to see if Alexandra was distracted. In a burst of sudden energy, he took off running. He dashed down the path, his small legs carrying him farther and farther away with surprising speed. "Come back!" Alexandra shouted, heart lurching into her throat. The younger boy stood frozen, wide-eyed. For a moment, Alexandra was torn between staying at his side and chasing the runaway. "Stay here," she told the younger one, then sprinted after the older nephew. Her footsteps crunched on the gravel, the manicured hedges looming on either side. He slipped past a large statue, then disappeared around a bend, heading into a part of the garden Alexandra hadn't seen before. She raced on, the path curving through thicker foliage. Panic fluttered in her chest. She had no idea how the estate's grounds were laid out, and the child could be anywhere by now. She turned corner after corner, calling his name, her voice echoing against quiet stone walls and carefully clipped shrubs. The air felt heavier with each step. Finally, Alexandra caught a glimpse of him near an old fountain. Relief flooded her, until she noticed the massive dog standing at the child's side. The animal's muscles tensed, its posture rigid, hackles raised. The boy stood stock still, tears filling his eyes. "Stay calm," Alexandra called, trying to keep her voice steady. She slowed her pace, but the dog let out a low, resonant growl, its gaze flicking to her, then back to the trembling nephew. It looked like a guard dog, left unleashed. She eased herself forward, hand outstretched. "Easy there. You're all right," she murmured to the child. The dog snarled, baring teeth. Alexandra's chest squeezed tight, and she silently prayed she could keep it from attacking. Suddenly, the thud of heavy boots pounded behind her. Joe appeared out of nowhere, shouting the dog's name. In his rush, he collided with Alexandra, nearly toppling her over. She stumbled onto her knees, skin scraping on the rough path. He seized the dog by the collar with a fierce yank, wrestling the animal back. "Get the kid!" Joe barked, his voice sharp. Ignoring the pain in her knees, Alexandra scrambled forward, scooping the terrified nephew into her arms. He clung to her, sobbing. The dog's growls rumbled in the background, but Joe kept it pinned, his own breaths ragged from the struggle. Alexandra exhaled in shaky relief. She wiped the boy's tears, stroking his hair. "You're safe," she repeated, heart still pounding. She barely registered Joe's harsh glare as he turned to address her. "You should have kept a closer eye on him," he muttered. Her cheeks grew hot at the accusation, yet she refused to snap back. The child in her arms was trembling, in need of comfort more than explanations. She pressed a soft kiss to the top of his head, murmuring reassurance. A new voice sliced through the tension. "What on earth is going on?" Travis strode into view, eyes dark with concern. His gaze flicked from Joe restraining the dog to Alexandra cradling the crying child. "I thought I made it clear. Safety is top priority." Alexandra took a breath, willing her voice not to quiver. "He ran off, and I lost him in the garden. He must have wandered close to where the dog was kept." Travis's stare lingered on the boy's tear-streaked face before he turned his attention to Joe, whose grip on the dog's collar was still white-knuckled. "Why was the dog loose?" Travis demanded. "I don't recall giving any orders to let him roam." Joe shrugged, looking defensive. "There must have been a latch undone. I was just—" "That's enough," Travis said sharply, eyes flashing. "We have protocols for a reason. He could have been seriously hurt." Uncertain if she should intervene, Alexandra carefully rose to her feet, holding the nephew's hand. She cleared her throat and admitted her part in the mishap. "I was with both of them, but I wasn't prepared for him to run so fast. I should have anticipated it." Yet she also felt compelled to add gently, "I didn't expect a guard dog in the gardens." Travis blew out a tense breath. He closed his eyes for a moment, then turned toward the child. The nephew looked up with watery eyes, fearful that he might be in trouble. Travis's expression softened. He stooped to the boy's height. "Next time, please don't wander off, all right?" he said, his tone firm but compassionate. The child nodded, hiccuping. Alexandra tightened her grip on the boy's hand, watching Travis stand and face Joe. "We'll talk later," he warned, leaving no room for argument. Joe simply nodded, leading the still agitated dog away. Only then did Travis look Alexandra in the eye. Despite the flicker of anger lingering in his features, there was something akin to gratitude there. "Thank you for staying calm. He looks calmer now," he said softly. She offered a small nod, not entirely sure how to respond. "He was scared, but he'll be okay. I think he just needs some reassurance." Travis nodded back, exhaling. "I appreciate what you did," he added, then glanced toward the house where a few staff members were peering from the windows, curious about the commotion. He seemed uncomfortable with the attention. Mrs. Rhodes appeared around the corner, cheeks flushed, eyes wide. Upon seeing that the child was safe, she placed a hand over her heart. "Thank heavens," she breathed. She moved closer, her gaze flicking between Travis and Alexandra. After a pause, she offered Alexandra a respectful look. "You did well out here. Not everyone would have kept her head like that." They walked back into the mansion together, the older nephew clinging to Alexandra's side. A hush spread among the staff, but Alexandra was too relieved to notice the stares. She just wanted to get the boy inside, let him rest, and ensure he felt protected. She tucked him under a light blanket in one of the sitting rooms, rubbing his back until the hiccups ceased. The younger nephew soon joined them, crowding in quietly with questions of his own. Alexandra did her best to explain, keeping her words simple and reassuring. Later that evening, Alexandra found herself lingering by one of the tall windows that overlooked the garden. The sunset painted the horizon in gentle pinks and golds, but a sliver of worry refused to leave her thoughts. She recalled the brief hint of recognition in Travis's eyes, approval that had surfaced when he saw how she handled the situation. He had so much going on behind that guarded expression. Perhaps, she thought, there was a chance he might start trusting her more. Or maybe that was wishful thinking. As the evening deepened, Mrs. Rhodes slipped into the kitchen where Alexandra was fixing hot cocoa for the nephews. "I just wanted to say, not many people would have braved that dog to reach the child." Her tone was low, but genuine admiration shone through. Alexandra let out a nervous laugh. "I'm just relieved no one got hurt. Next time I'll be quicker to notice when they want to run off." A soft smile lifted Mrs. Rhodes's mouth. "Don't be too hard on yourself. You're stepping into a complicated household. Travis rarely shows his feelings, but I can tell he doesn't regret hiring you." Then she departed with a quiet air, leaving Alexandra with a faint sense of accomplishment and a heavier awareness of the mansion's secrets. Later, after tucking the children into bed, she left their room softly lit by a small lamp. As she closed the door behind her, she heard voices drifting from down the hall. Two of the maids were whispering, one saying something about filling the void the last nanny left behind. Alexandra paused, heart sinking at the implication. The conversation faded as the maids moved away, but doubt settled in. What had happened to the previous nanny to make her leave so suddenly? And would Alexandra share the same fate if she stepped out of line? She leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. The house was full of half-spoken truths and sorrow that seeped through every corridor. She couldn't shake the thought that maybe she was the next person they were testing, someone to either trust or cast out if she dared to dig too deep. As she turned out the hall lights and headed for her attic room, one question kept echoing in her mind. What truly caused the previous nanny's sudden departure, and if the same fate might await her? Early morning light bathed the quiet mansion in subdued gold, illuminating the long corridor where Alexandra walked with careful steps. Her reflection glided across polished floors, and she couldn't help feeling like a stranger passing through someone else's dream. The hushed atmosphere lent an eerie quality to the voices she heard around the corner, two maids whispering in tense, clipped tones. "She's been hired at a difficult time. The family's obsession with appearances can't be easy," one maid murmured. "They don't want more scandal," the other replied. "Not after what happened." Their words trailed off as Alexandra stepped closer. The moment they spotted her, they exchanged tight smiles and hurried away, leaving her brimming with questions. What scandal were they referring to? Was it linked to the previous nanny's abrupt departure, or the tragedy hovering over Travis's family? She carried those thoughts to the children's study area, determined to keep any concerns locked away. The two boys sat at a small table, pencils in hand and books spread before them. The older nephew had a math worksheet, fidgeting with his eraser, while the younger one drew aimlessly, seemingly uninterested in the reading task. Alexandra offered them a warm smile, resisting the urge to ask about their mother. She sensed that topic remained a raw wound, not easily discussed. Instead, she helped them go over simple phrases, careful not to push too hard. By mid-morning, they had eased into a peaceful routine. The younger boy traced letters while Alexandra guided his hand. The older one asked for help with a complicated story problem. Their subdued cooperation comforted her. At least they seemed willing to trust her patience. Yet beneath their efforts, she noticed moments when they both fell silent, eyes drifting off, as though remembering someone who used to guide them this way. Once their lessons ended, she gathered her notes and headed toward Travis's study. Earlier that morning, Mrs. Rhodes had mentioned he liked to stay updated on the children's progress, so Alexandra prepared a concise report. She knocked on his half-closed door and waited. The study was lined with dark wood shelves, filled with thick books and heavy ledgers. A large desk stood near the windows, covered with neat stacks of documents. Behind it, Travis sat, brow furrowed as he sifted through paperwork. "Come in," he said, looking up. His expression flickered with a hint of relief at the interruption. "I have the children's lesson notes," Alexandra offered, stepping forward. When he gestured for her to approach, she placed the small folder on a clear corner of his desk. She caught a glimpse of a photograph in a silver frame, an elegant young woman smiling broadly. The resemblance to Travis was striking, though her features were softer, her eyes bright with happiness. Alexandra guessed it must be his late sister. A pang of sadness welled up. That single image spoke volumes about the life that was lost. Travis followed her gaze and, in one swift motion, shut a file that lay beneath the photo. His hand rested firmly on the stack of papers. Whatever he was handling, it was private, and possibly tied to the children's inheritance. The shuttered look in his eyes warned Alexandra not to ask questions. "Thanks," he said, tapping the folder she'd given him. I'll read this later." She nodded and turned to leave, only to nearly collide with Joe in the hallway. He stood as rigid as ever, arms crossed over his broad chest. "What are you doing in there?" he asked quietly, though there was an edge in his tone that suggested he already had an opinion. "Just delivering a report," Alexandra said, forcing a calm breath. Joe's gaze slid past her toward the study's door. "Family business is family business," he said, lowering his voice. "Might be wise to stick to caring for the kids and not poke around in things that don't concern you." Heat flared in Alexandra's cheeks. She wasn't sure if it was anger or embarrassment. Despite wanting to stand her ground, she recognized that an argument with Joe could cost her more than her pride. "I understand," she managed, stepping aside. Joe stared at her a moment longer before walking off, boots echoing dully on the marble floor. Her day improved unexpectedly when the younger nephew tugged at her sleeve after lunch. "Come see," he whispered, darting his eyes around to ensure no one else heard. Curiosity piqued, Alexandra followed him down a narrow back hallway, then under the grand staircase. The space there formed a small hideout, just big enough for a child to crouch and tuck away little treasures. She crouched inside with him, noticing a few toy cars, a flashlight, and a stuffed animal missing an ear. "This is your secret spot?" she asked in a hushed tone. He nodded, dark hair falling in front of his eyes. "Mom showed us how to hide here during storms," he admitted, voice trembling slightly. "When the thunder was loud, she said it was our special fort." Alexandra's heart twisted. He looked so vulnerable, reminiscing about comfort he might never feel again. She gently ruffled his hair. "It's a good fort. Thank you for showing me." She spent the next few minutes sitting with him there, letting him talk about the games he used to play. Even if the words came haltingly, she sensed he was opening a small door to his trust. By the time she emerged, the boy's eyes looked brighter, as if sharing that memory brought a measure of relief. In the laundry room later, while she folded freshly washed sheets, Mrs. Rhodes stepped in, wiping her hands on her apron. The scent of detergent hung in the air, a soft, clean smell. "The children seem calmer with you," the housekeeper said gently. "They've been through a lot, but keep doing what you're doing." Alexandra offered a grateful smile. "I just want to help them feel safe." Mrs. Rhodes placed a folded towel on the pile, then lowered her voice. "Tragedy can bring out the worst in powerful families. There's always pressure, appearances to maintain, reputations to protect, inheritances to debate. That can create a lot of darkness." Alexandra felt a chill. She recalled the photograph of Travis's sister, her radiant smile. It was hard to imagine how sorrow and conflict had overtaken that happiness. "He must miss her," she murmured. "More than he'll ever show," Mrs. Rhodes replied. "He tries to keep everything together for the children, but certain relatives see vulnerability as weakness." She hesitated, looking Alexandra in the eye. "Be careful, dear, and be patient with him." Not long after that conversation, Alexandra passed by Travis's office on her way upstairs. His door was slightly ajar, and she heard him speaking in a tight, agitated tone, as though struggling to contain frustration. "I've told you, Uncle, the board meeting is tomorrow." "Yes, I'm aware. I said I'd handle it," he snapped. Then, after a short pause, "I don't need you questioning my fitness as their guardian. They're my family, and I—" His voice dipped too low to make out the final words. She continued up the stairs, unsettled by what she'd overheard. That demanding uncle must be the same one who held sway over the family's affairs. Perhaps he blamed Travis for his sister's death or doubted his capability to protect the children. The possibility that Travis might lose guardianship sent unease thrumming through Alexandra's veins. An hour later, Travis found her in the playroom, speaking quietly so as not to alarm the children. "I have to travel for a meeting," he said, the tension in his voice still evident. "I'll be away for a couple of days, and when I come back I need you and the boys ready to travel with me. It can't wait." Alexandra nodded, searching his expression for more clues. He offered no explanation, only that they should pack light. Then he left, the weight of his unspoken concerns following him. Rumors soon spread among the staff, whispers that Travis's position as guardian might be challenged by other relatives. Joe looked more on edge than usual, pacing the halls at odd hours. Mrs. Rhodes, although trying to maintain calm, wore a worried crease in her brow whenever she thought no one was watching. Alexandra's thoughts churned. If Travis was fighting to keep the children under his care, what else was at stake? That night, she found herself too restless to sleep. Driven by her growing curiosity, she wandered into the mansion's stately library, its shelves of leather-bound volumes stretching to a high ceiling. Faint moonlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. She browsed the spines, lingering near the end of a bookshelf where she discovered a small bundle of papers, brittle around the edges. One letter was half burned, the ink smudged from scorch marks. She lifted it carefully, reading a few lines that mentioned her sudden death and a contested estate. Her heart pounded. Was this letter about Travis's sister? The words foul play and accident were faint but discernible. Before she could process what she'd found, a floorboard creaked behind her. She spun around, slipping the damaged letter into her pocket with trembling hands. Mrs. Rhodes stood in the library doorway, eyes wide. "My goodness, you frightened me," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. "I didn't expect anyone here so late." Alexandra tried to control her breathing, worried she looked guilty. I couldn't sleep. I thought I'd read for a bit." Mrs. Rhodes came closer, her gaze flicking briefly to the shelf where Alexandra had found the letter. She said nothing about it, instead placing a gentle hand on Alexandra's arm. "Don't let your imagination run away with you," she whispered. "Have faith that Travis is doing what he can. He may not show it, but he needs allies, not doubters." After the housekeeper left, Alexandra released a long breath. She wanted to trust Travis, yet each new secret she uncovered only raised more questions. She returned to her attic room with the letter hidden against her side, determined to decipher it when she could. If it confirmed her growing suspicions, she was truly caught in the middle of a dangerous web. Sleep came in restless fits, filled with disjointed images of dark hallways, fiery accidents, and the quiet anguish in the children's eyes. At some point past midnight, she jerked awake to the sound of a firm knock at her door. She lay there, heart hammering, until the knock sounded again, more insistent this time. Then she heard Travis's voice. "Alexandra," he called from the other side. "I need you to come to my study. We need to talk now." A single lamp glowed in the corner of Travis's study, elongating shadows that stretched across the polished floor and dark-paneled walls. Alexandra's heart thumped as she stepped inside, remembering the urgency in his voice when he summoned her. She closed the door quietly behind her, aware of the midnight stillness weighing on the mansion. Travis stood by the window, his back to her. Outside, a pale moon cast a silvery sheen over the gardens. He didn't immediately turn, but she could see his reflection in the glass, his brow furrowed, jaw set in rigid lines. She cleared her throat softly. "You wanted to see me?" "Yes." His voice came low, as though he carried the weight of a dozen unspoken troubles. Slowly he turned around, folding his arms. "Sorry for pulling you out of bed, but this can't wait." She approached, keeping her distance near a tall bookshelf. The air in the room felt tense, charged with something neither of them knew how to express. "I'm listening," she said, carefully modulating her tone. Whatever pressed so heavily on Travis, it seemed to revolve around his family's turmoil. After a moment, he gestured toward a leather chair opposite his desk. "Sit," he said, then settled himself behind the desk. She obeyed, perching on the edge of the seat. Her gaze drifted to a photo of his late sister, which he'd now placed in a more prominent spot on the desktop. The woman's smile seemed both comforting and tragic, a reminder of loss. Travis followed her eyes, exhaling sharply. My sister's death wasn't just a tragedy for the family. It caused a legal storm no one was prepared for, he began. She left her boys in my care, but she also left behind a sizable inheritance. Now, every relative with a hint of greed or influence wants a say. Alexandra leaned forward, hands clasped. A part of her had suspected this, but hearing it spelled out felt startling. So, they're challenging your guardianship? In every way possible, he replied, glancing down at some documents on his desk. We have formal hearings, boardrooms full of lawyers, and a controlling uncle who's convinced I'm not fit to manage the boy's future. He pressed his lips together, letting the bitterness of that statement hang in the air. She tried to picture Travis locked in a courtroom battle or cornered by suspicious relatives in well-tailored suits. It was easier to see him striding through this mansion in stoic silence, but apparently behind that facade, he was fighting relentlessly for the children. That must be exhausting, she said quietly. He nodded, shifting some papers aside. My sister was my only real family. I refused to let her boys suffer under relatives who see them as nothing more than a path to money. His voice caught briefly, though he kept his expression controlled. Alexandra realized then that Travis stood not just as a distant businessman, but as a guardian carrying a private burden of guilt and love. Her mind flashed to how protective he had been, even though he rarely displayed overt affection. I understand, she said, choosing her words carefully. What can I do to help? He studied her, as though weighing how much truth he could safely share. You can keep being their nanny. His lips curved into a humorless smile. Some in the family think hiring an outsider was a mistake. They see you as a potential scandal. But I need you here if we're going to maintain a sense of stability and show the courts the children are well taken care of. A jolt of surprise passed through her. Scandal? Why would anyone— People talk, he said shortly. A young woman in the house, the children's mother gone. Some are eager to spin whatever narrative benefits their interests. Just be aware that eyes are on you. On us. She recalled Joe's cold stares, the staff's tight-lipped whispers, the mysterious phone calls Travis seemed to be fending off. All right, I'll be careful. He nodded once, then rubbed his forehead as if trying to ward off a brewing headache. There's more. I have an important business trip. We leave early in the morning. You and the boys are coming with me. Her eyebrows shot up. Where are we going? To the city. I have a board meeting that can't be rescheduled and a critical negotiation that involves the children's trust. My uncle will no doubt be there, sniffing around for any excuse to question my fitness as guardian. I won't leave the boys alone in the mansion. They'll be safer by my side. She hesitated, thinking of how the children would handle a sudden journey. They might be unsettled by new surroundings. Are you sure it's best for them? Travis's eyes narrowed. It's safer than leaving them here, vulnerable to meddling relatives who might suddenly pay a visit with lawyers in tow. A trace of fear underscored his tone, though he tried to hide it. Alexandra decided not to argue. She gave a small nod. All right, I'll help make sure they're ready. Their conversation slipped into an uneasy quiet. For the first time, she sensed that Travis was on the brink of saying more, something that hovered between them like unspoken heartbreak. He drummed his fingers on the desk, looking as though he wanted to confide in her, but whatever words he might have spoken never came. Instead, he rose from his chair and walked her to the door. Get some rest, he said, his voice low. Morning will come sooner than we think. Outside, the corridor felt even more still, as if the mansion itself were holding its breath. Alexandra went back to her small room, heart pounding in her ears. She gathered her belongings, preparing the bare essentials for the trip. A swirl of anxiety churned inside her. This wasn't just a simple nanny job. She'd stepped into a high-stakes game of inheritance, powerful relatives, and hidden grief. She only hoped she was strong enough to see it through. By the time dawn broke, staff were bustling about. Suitcases lined the entrance hall, and Mrs. Rhodes oversaw the loading of a sleek black car parked in front. The children stood quietly nearby, each clutching a small bag. Alexandra felt their apprehension as she herded them gently into the back seat, taking her place beside them. Through the window she glimpsed Joe standing off to the side, gaze vigilant, as though expecting trouble at any moment. Travis slid into the driver's seat. He glanced at Alexandra in the rearview mirror, offering a nod before turning the key. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as they left the estate behind, the iron gates swinging shut in solemn farewell. The boys were subdued, exchanging uncertain glances, but Alexandra tried to keep a calm face. If she appeared confident, maybe it would help them relax. The drive to the airport felt surreal. Bare trees lined the highway, the sky gradually brightening overhead. Travis stayed focused on the road, occasionally calling out reminders to the children about seatbelts or asking if they were all right. Alexandra watched the passing scenery and wondered how many times Travis had made this journey on guard against an invisible force seeking to tear the boys from his care. At the airport, a private jet waited for them on a small runway. The hustle of baggage handlers, the hum of engines in the crisp morning air, all of it pointed to a lifestyle far beyond anything Alexandra had known before. She guided the boys up the steps into the plush interior, heart still hammering. Travis followed, speaking briefly with the pilot, then settled in a leather seat near the cockpit. The flight felt both luxurious and tense. The children gazed wide-eyed at the cabin's upscale decor but huddled close to Alexandra, unsure if they were allowed to be excited. Travis spent much of the flight working on his laptop, phone buzzing intermittently with messages. Each time it rang, lines of worry deepened on his face. Hours later they arrived in a city that pulsed with energy. Tall buildings jutted into the sky, neon signs flashing in the waning daylight. Cars and cabs honked in a congested flow of traffic. Compared to the quiet mansion grounds, it was like entering another world. Alexandra held the children's hands as they left the private terminal, stifling her own nervous excitement. Travis ushered them into a sleek black SUV waiting outside. "This is it," he muttered under his breath as he pulled out a phone. "I have back-to-back meetings tomorrow. Keep the boys occupied at the hotel. Make sure they're comfortable but stay discreet." Their destination was a towering building in the heart of downtown, glass windows reflecting the twilight sky. Inside, the lobby shimmered with marble floors and golden chandeliers. Stunned by the opulence, the children clung tighter to Alexandra. Travis guided them to a private elevator that whisked them upward to a suite overlooking a maze of streets and glowing billboards. When they stepped into the suite, Travis exhaled and turned to Alexandra. "We'll figure this out. Just keep the boys close. My uncle is somewhere in this city, and I don't want any surprises before my meetings." She nodded, though a twinge of unease flickered in her stomach. "Understood." He disappeared into an adjoining room, phone already pressed to his ear. Alexandra sighed and faced the children, who looked both tired and awestruck. "Let's check out what's here," she said, trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice. "I see a pool downstairs. Maybe tomorrow we can go for a swim?" Early the next morning, she did exactly that, taking the boys to the hotel's tranquil pool. They splashed around, giggling for the first time since leaving the mansion. Alexandra felt a momentary sense of relief. This was what kids were supposed to be like, carefree and laughing, not weighed down by adult worries. But even in the pool's gentle warmth, she saw an older couple whispering and eyeing them from nearby loungers. Their hushed discussion felt invasive. Could they recognize Travis's name or suspect the children's identity? Back in the suite, Travis paced the living room, phone in hand. "Yes, Uncle," he said through gritted teeth. "We'll talk at the board meeting." He caught Alexandra's glance and gestured for her to keep the children preoccupied. Anxiety clung to him like a cloak, and she sensed the negotiations tomorrow would be pivotal in determining whether he remained in control of his nephew's future or lost them to a family power play. The day closed with an uneasy hush. After dinner in the suite, Alexandra tucked the children into a luxurious double bed, reading them a short story until their eyelids drooped. Once they were asleep, she quietly stepped into her own room, hoping exhaustion would overwhelm her churning thoughts. Instead, her phone buzzed. She frowned at the unknown caller ID and answered, expecting a stray telemarketer. But after a short pause, the line crackled. There was no greeting, just the faint sound of breathing, then a voice, distorted, low. If you value him, and if you value yourself, stay out of what doesn't concern you. Her heart lurched. Who is this? She whispered. A beep signaled the call had ended. Then a text arrived, equally cryptic. Travis can't outrun his past, and neither can you. Better start running. She stared at the screen, pulse pounding in her ears. Whoever this was, they knew about Travis's troubles and threatened to drag her into it, or perhaps tear them all apart. As she puts the children to bed, Alexandra's phone buzzes with an unknown number sending cryptic messages about Travis's past, and possibly her own. Morning light filtered through the sheer curtains, softening the city's sharp edges outside the hotel windows. Alexandra woke with a start, her pulse still racing from the cryptic message she'd received the night before. The words echoed in her mind, references to a caretaker who had fled, warnings about Travis's past. It felt like a chill that refused to leave her bones. She slipped out of bed, checked her phone again, and confirmed there were no new messages. Yet the silence did little to ease her anxiety. Not wanting to worry the children, she pushed aside her fears and got ready for the day. Travis had left instructions for them to join him at a high-profile business conference nearby. Although Alexandra wasn't sure how the boys would handle such a formal event, she understood it was vital for them to stay close to Travis. After last night's threat, the idea of being far from him, or from the security staff, felt unsettling. She smoothed down the children's button-up shirts and adjusted their small ties. The older boy fiddled nervously with his collar, while the younger hugged a favorite stuffed animal to his chest. "Do we really have to go?" the older one asked, his gaze flicking up at Alexandra with uncertainty. She nodded gently, making her voice as reassuring as possible. "It's important. Your uncle has some meetings and he wants to keep you both close. I'll be right beside you the whole time, okay?" A flicker of relief crossed his face, though worry still shadowed his eyes. They left the suite together, stepping into the hotel's private elevator that whisked them down to the lobby. Travis was already waiting there, dressed in a tailored suit that made him look every inch the unflappable businessman. His expression softened when he saw the children clinging to Alexandra's hands. "You both look sharp," he said, gently ruffling the younger nephew's hair. Then he turned to Alexandra, speaking softly so the kids wouldn't overhear. "Are you all right? You seem tense." She mustered a small smile. "Just a bit nervous about taking the boys to such a big event. But we'll be fine." Travis nodded and led them outside, where a sleek car waited. The streets hummed with early traffic, and city lights still glowed in the rising sun. Alexandra settled the children into the back seat, trying her best to act calm and collected, despite her heart hammering with every jostle of the car. They arrived at a towering conference center made of glass and steel. Men and women in elegant suits strode through the revolving doors, some pausing to exchange guarded handshakes or greet each other with measured smiles. The energy was charged, like a buzz of silent competition. Alexandra swallowed hard, noticing the curious glances cast toward Travis and his nephews. A couple of passers-by craned their necks to see who the new arrivals were. Inside, the main hall spread out in a shimmering marble expanse. Conference rooms lined either side, each housing different panels, meetings, or negotiations. Travis guided them toward a registration area, never releasing his protective grip on the older boy's shoulder. Alexandra walked slightly behind, the younger nephew clutching her hand while scanning the opulent surroundings with wide eyes. A man in a crisp navy suit approached, greeting Travis with a measured nod. but his gaze skimmed over Alexandra and the children before returning to Travis. "Good to see you," the man said, not bothering to hide the hint of tension in his voice. "I trust you've come prepared." Travis's jaw tightened. "We have a lot to discuss, Pierce," he replied coolly. "Let's handle business in the conference room." Pierce offered a tight-lipped smile. "Right this way." He motioned for Travis to follow. Alexandra didn't miss the way Pierce's eyes lingered on her, as if silently noting her presence for future gossip. They proceeded down a hallway of thick carpeting and frosted glass doors. A staff member led the children and Alexandra to a small lounge area attached to one of the conference rooms. "You can wait here until Mr. Travis finishes his initial briefing," the staffer said politely, leaving them with a tray of refreshments. But before Alexandra could get the children settled, voices spilled through the partially open door leading to the adjacent room. The tone was sharp, words clipped. She glanced that way, uncertain if she should step in or stay back. Suddenly she heard a man's gravelly voice rise above the murmurs. "I know what really happened with your sister, Travis. You think you can sweep it under the rug?" Her breath caught. It was an accusation, raw and pointed. The older nephew looked up, alarmed. Alexandra rose, her instincts telling her to check if Travis needed support or if she ought to distract the children from overhearing more. Gently, she guided the boys toward a corner stacked with magazines and puzzle books, urging them to focus on something else. Despite her efforts, the tension bled through the walls. Travis's voice reverberated low and commanding. "Don't you dare bring my sister into this negotiation. She has nothing to do with our deal." Silence followed, like the lull before a storm. Alexandra ran a hand over the younger nephew's hair, murmuring reassuring words. Then footsteps thudded in the corridor. A heavy door slammed. A furious-looking man in an expensive suit burst into the lounge, nearly knocking into Alexandra. He paused for half a second, eyes brimming with malice, before pushing past her. A cold whisper escaped his lips. "You're making a mistake by standing with him." Then he vanished down the hallway. Her heart pounded. She had no idea who he was or what threat he posed, but fear clutched at her chest. Moments later, Travis appeared in the lounge, face set in a mix of anger and something close to dread. He spotted the children who were huddled together. Alexandra hovered protectively by their side. "That was Lucian Hall," Travis said flatly, still breathing hard. "One of my so-called rivals in this negotiation. He thinks he can blackmail me into signing a deal that benefits his faction." Alexandra's eyes flicked to the hallway where Lucian had disappeared. "He mentioned your sister. Are you okay?" Travis lowered his gaze, jaw clenched. "He's convinced he knows something about her final days that could jeopardize my claim to the nephew's inheritance. As if it's a game to him." In that moment, she sensed a storm brewing under Travis's composed surface. Whatever this Lucian character claimed to know clearly rattled Travis. "What is he hoping to accomplish by threatening you?" she asked quietly. Travis glanced at the children. "Leverage," he said simply. His fists tightened at his sides. "He's hoping to force a partnership by digging up rumors that my family can't handle another scandal." Before Alexandra could respond, a couple of security guards entered, drawn by the commotion. They escorted Travis and his group to a quieter, cordoned-off area, murmuring apologies for the disturbance. The boys, shaken by the heated tension, clung to Alexandra's arms. She could feel their hearts racing and did her best to keep them calm, her voice low and steady. "Hey, it's all right," she whispered, kneeling to meet their eyes. "No one's going to hurt you. You're safe with me." Their tight grips gradually eased, though they still looked uneasy. Shortly after, Travis was summoned back to another meeting room. Alexandra faced a dilemma. Should she keep the children here or go with him? She decided to remain in the lounge, the safer option, entertaining the boys with small jokes and simple card games. Yet every so often she caught snippets of raised voices from beyond the door, Travis's frustration weaving through the muffled arguments. At one point, the conference room door swung open again, revealing Travis standing face to face with Lucian. Their exchange crackled with tension. "Stay away from my family," Travis hissed under his breath, sounding more protective than she had ever heard him. "Whatever you think you can prove, it won't matter if you can't produce solid evidence." Lucian sneered, glancing toward Alexandra and the boys. "Oh, I have proof enough. But if you play nice, maybe we can keep it out of the headlines." He pivoted toward Alexandra with a mocking bow. "Poor dear, caught in the middle. Are you part of the cover-up too?" Something in Alexandra snapped. She squared her shoulders even as her knees quivered. "Leave us alone," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "This has nothing to do with me, or the children." For a heartbeat, Lucian regarded her with a mix of curiosity and scorn. Then security arrived, ushering him away. Alexandra's breath whooshed out in relief, though her hands still shook. Travis turned to her, tension etched into every line of his face. "Thank you," he said, voice hushed. "I know this is way beyond what you signed up for." When the day's meetings finally paused, the children, overstimulated by the adult drama, had their own meltdown. The older one whimpered that his head hurt, while the younger refused to be put down, arms latched around Alexandra's waist. She soothed them both, wiping away tears, reassuring them as best she could. Travis rubbed the back of his neck, looking torn between anger at Lucian and guilt at exposing the boys to such chaos. A short while later, Alexandra discovered a small balcony just off a lesser-used corridor. She invited Travis to step out for a moment's peace, leaving the children inside with a kindly staff member. The sun was setting, painting the skyline in molten hues of gold and orange. The city hummed below, distant and impersonal. Travis rested his hands on the balcony rail, gaze fixed on the horizon. "Lucienne claims to know details about my sister's death. Details that could twist the narrative and make it seem like our family had something to hide." He closed his eyes, as though weighed down by memory. "I still don't have all the answers to what really happened. But if he manipulates the facts, I could lose custody of my nephews." Alexandra's heart twisted. She reached out, placing a tentative hand on his shoulder. "You can't let him rattle you. The kids need you strong. They're already anxious." He turned, meeting her gaze. Something like gratitude flickered in his eyes. "I know. I can't afford to crumble in front of them." His tension eased slightly, as though her words had found their mark. For a moment, the intensity between them felt oddly intimate, bound by mutual concern for the children. That night, the four of them retreated to the hotel suite, each emotionally drained. After the boys fell asleep, clutching soft blankets and stuffed toys, Alexandra stood in the hallway, arms wrapped around herself. She replayed the day's events, from Lucian's veiled threats to Travis's desperate determination. Could she truly protect these children from a world so hungry for power? As she finally stepped into her own room, she noticed her phone lighting up on the bedside table. Another message from an unknown number waited, each word sending a jolt of dread through her chest. "If you truly care about them, you'll leave, or you'll regret it." They returned to the mansion on a gray afternoon, the sky thick with clouds that mirrored the tense mood within the car. Alexandra glanced at Travis in the driver's seat. He kept his eyes forward, shoulders rigid, as if the weight of the conference drama still pressed down on him. The two nephews, sensing the adult's unspoken worry, rode in unusual silence. When they pulled up to the estate, Alexandra felt a cold dread. Something in the air warned that new troubles awaited them here. Mrs. Rhodes opened the front door, her expression taut. The children tumbled out of the car, looking relieved to be back on familiar ground. Travis offered only a curt nod to the housekeeper before vanishing into his study. Alexandra stood in the entrance hall, aware of the staff's sidelong glances. The hush that fell over them was unsettling, like they were bracing for a storm that might tear through the household at any moment. Not long after, an unexpected wave of nausea swept over her. Her vision blurred, and she had to steady herself against the banister. Concern flashed in Mrs. Rhodes's face. "My dear," she murmured, "you look terribly pale. Are you ill?" Alexandra swallowed against the sickness rising in her throat. "I'm not sure," she managed. She let Mrs. Rhodes lead her to the kitchen, where the woman insisted she sip some water. A handful of the staff hovered nearby, their concern palpable. Alexandra tried to wave them off politely, wanting to avoid fuss, but her heart pounded with an unfamiliar sort of alarm. Before she could fully recover, a cough alerted her to the presence of Joe, the security guard. He stood with arms folded, casting a skeptical eye. "You all right?" he asked, voice gruff. "I'll be fine," Alexandra said, forcing a smile she didn't feel. If she seemed weak, she feared Joe would assume she wasn't fit for the job. With rumors swirling and tensions high, she couldn't afford to appear fragile. Over the next day, the nausea didn't subside. Alexandra's limbs felt leaden, and a dull ache pulsed in her temples. She tried to push on with the children's routine, supervising their reading lessons, sharing short walks in the garden, but the effort left her dizzy. On one such walk, the world spun suddenly, and she had to grip the garden fence for balance. The older nephew stared up at her with worried eyes. Embarrassed and alarmed, she turned away from his questioning look. That evening, in the solitude of her attic room, Alexandra made a quiet decision. She had to see a doctor. Her grandmother's health struggles had shown her that ignoring symptoms only made matters worse, and besides, the children needed her steady and strong. She summoned what courage she had and informed Mrs. Rhodes she would be visiting the local clinic early the next morning. When she arrived at the clinic, a drizzle coated the sidewalks in a shimmering film, reflecting the gray sky overhead. The stark white walls and antiseptic smell inside reminded her of hospital visits back home. She swallowed her nerves, explaining her symptoms to the nurse who led her to a small exam room. Blood tests were taken, and the soft-spoken doctor, an older woman with kind eyes, listened to Alexandra's concerns carefully. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Alexandra sat on the exam table, fiddling with a loose thread on her sweater. At last, the doctor returned with the test results, her expression serene but serious. "My dear," she said gently, "I'm not sure if you were aware of this possibility, but you're pregnant." Alexandra's heart stumbled in her chest. She stared at the doctor, mind reeling with a mixture of shock, confusion, and an odd flicker of happiness that she quickly stifled. This was the absolute worst timing. Are you certain?" The doctor nodded, lips curving into a sympathetic smile. "Yes, quite certain. And there's more. It appears you're carrying triplets." For several seconds, Alexandra couldn't speak. Triplets. Her mind went blank, then flooded with the impossible implications. How would she care for 3 babies? How would Travis and his family react? She tried to form a coherent question, but all that emerged was a trembling breath. The doctor offered steady reassurance, explaining the need for immediate prenatal care, more frequent checkups, and the challenges of a high-risk pregnancy. Alexandra could barely absorb it all. Her thoughts spiraled toward her grandmother's mounting hospital bills, her precarious position as a nanny in a mansion full of secrets, and the complicated situation swirling around Travis. If she lost this job, she'd lose everything: her ability to pay for her grandmother's treatment, her place in the only home she'd known in months. She thanked the doctor and slipped out into the drizzle, hugging her coat tight around her. Though faint with worry, she forced herself to return to the mansion, terrified of who might notice her dazed state. As she crept through the front door, she heard voices in the sitting room. Travis's family members had arrived unannounced. She recognized the brusque tone of a controlling aunt and the low rumble of a distant uncle's voice. Her stomach churned. So that was the tense presence she'd sensed upon arriving. They were here. From around the corner, Alexandra caught snatches of the conversation. Remarks about tragedy, inheritance, and an unfit environment. She peered in silently, seeing Travis standing stiffly as a pair of older relatives berated him for refusing to maintain respectability. Alexandra tensed. Was she a target of their complaints, or just another pawn in their chessboard of blame? She retreated to avoid detection, heading upstairs to her room. There she closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. Tears of confusion burned her eyes. She was pregnant, carrying triplets, and surrounded by people who would see this revelation as the ultimate scandal. Her first thought was to tell Travis, but dread wrapped around her. She couldn't predict his reaction. Might he feel betrayed or cornered, given the weight of the children's legal battles? Or would he be relieved to know she carried a piece of their future? Nothing felt certain. Later, she managed to slip back downstairs and check on the children, who were sequestered in the library with Mrs. Rhodes. The boys welcomed her with subdued smiles. Their aunt's visit had clearly unsettled them. Alexandra sat with them, reading quietly from a picture book. She tried to make her voice soothing, though fear still coiled in her gut. Each time she glanced at their wide eyes, her thoughts buzzed with worry about how her own unborn babies would ever fit into this fractured family. Hours crept by. The aunt and uncle eventually left, leaving behind an air of disapproval and new layers of tension. Alexandra found Travis in the drawing room, staring at the dying embers in the fireplace, shoulders weighed down by gloom. She hovered in the doorway, torn between the urge to comfort him and the overwhelming secret she carried. He looked up, eyes heavy with fatigue. "They're threatening legal action again," he said softly, as if he could still hear his relatives' accusations echoing off the walls. "My uncle claims there's more to the story about my sister's death, that I somehow failed to protect her. They want the kids out of my custody." She took a tentative step closer. "You won't lose them," she said, voice trembling with earnestness. "You've done nothing wrong. They're just using fear to break you." He offered a ragged sigh that bordered on a defeated laugh. "Fear has a way of winning if you let it." A hush followed, broken only by the subtle crackle of ember in the fireplace. Alexandra fought the urge to spill everything, to say how fear had already consumed her. But in that moment, she couldn't bring herself to add one more burden to his shoulders. Instead, she laid a hand on his arm. "You're strong," she said gently. "I see it every day, how you fight for those children." Her words lingered in the space between them, a tentative thread of understanding. Eventually, she withdrew to her attic room, determined to think it all through. That night, she could hardly sleep. Her mind raced with what-ifs. What if Travis found out about the pregnancy from someone else first? What if the family accused her of trapping him? What if the stress cost her the safety she so desperately needed for herself and her babies? By the time the grandfather clock chimed midnight, she'd resolved to keep her secret for at least a little while longer. She needed to gather her courage, figure out how to secure her grandmother's medical treatment, and hope that she could navigate this crisis without losing everyone's trust. Then, just as she started to drift off, footsteps sounded in the corridor outside her attic door. The gentle tread slowed, as though someone paused right there, listening. Alexandra's pulse thundered. Was it Joe, or perhaps the aunt, checking on her? She held her breath, heart pounding, until the footsteps continued down the stairs. But the echo lingered, a stark reminder that in this house, little remained private. She retreated under the blankets, tears threatening to spill. A single thought consumed her. Someone might already suspect what was growing in her belly, and she had no idea how much longer she could hide it. As Alexandra retreated to her attic room, deciding to keep her pregnancy secret for now, especially from Travis, but she overhears footsteps outside her door, as if someone already suspects. A thin drizzle clung to the morning light, painting the mansion in washed-out grays as Alexandra rose from another restless night. She pressed her hand to her abdomen, torn between the secret she harbored and the dread of how others might twist it against her. Her thoughts buzzed with 1,000 questions. What would Travis say if he knew? Would he resent her or stand by her side? Downstairs, she found the children huddled in the dining room, nibbling toast in uneasy silence. Even though the older nephew tried to appear brave, she noticed he jumped at the slightest noise. She offered them a reassuring smile and a gentle ruffle of their hair, knowing all too well how unsettled they must feel after so many arguments and visits from controlling relatives. The younger nephew clung to her sleeve, as if needing her presence to stay grounded. Travis soon walked in, his posture stiff, eyes dull from lack of sleep. He acknowledged Alexandra with a faint nod, then paused by the children. "Hey," he said softly, trying to sound normal. "We'll get through this. I promise." There was an ache in his voice that tugged at Alexandra's heart. She remembered his late-night confessions of guilt, how he felt he'd failed his sister, how the unrelenting pressure from family might tear him apart. She found herself wishing she could speak freely, but the weight of her own news choked the words in her throat. Instead, she helped the children finish their breakfast, picking up on the tension swirling around them like a storm about to break. Shortly afterward, one of the household staff appeared at the door, murmuring that Travis's aunt awaited him in the drawing room. Alexandra caught his stricken look as he rose from his chair. "Stay with the kids," he said. "I'll handle this." A part of her wanted to protest. She suspected the aunt had come specifically to corner Travis about Alexandra, about the suspicious circumstances clouding the house, about everything. But she obeyed, leading the children to the playroom. Their attempts at coloring couldn't mask the hushed dread that hung in the air. The older boy kept glancing at the door, as if expecting someone to burst in any second with accusations. After a while, Alexandra decided to quietly slip away. Mrs. Rhodes was there to watch the children, offering a kind nod of understanding as Alexandra left. She navigated the hallways until she found herself near the drawing room, drawn by the rising volume of voices. Carefully, she edged closer, half concealed by a tall vase of elaborate flowers. Through a crack in the double doors, she saw Travis standing rigid, face to face with his aunt. The woman had a sharp, angular presence, pursed lips, a severe bun, every inch of her radiating disapproval. "You're digging yourself into a pit," the aunt hissed. "This nanny is a distraction you can't afford. The rumors are already circulating that she's more than just a caretaker." Travis's jaw tightened. "She's good with the kids," he retorted, his voice dangerously calm. "That's all that matters." "Is it?" The aunt's gaze flicked around as though searching for a crack in the walls where Alexandra might be eavesdropping. "She'll bring scandal upon this family if you let her stay. Who knows what she's after? The old nanny was trouble enough." Alexandra's heart sank at the mention of her predecessor, that elusive figure who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. She forced herself to stay silent, though her pulse hammered in her ears. Travis took a step forward, fists clenched. "Don't insult her when you don't know her." "She's an opportunist," the aunt insisted, voice rising. "A pretty face hired in a moment of desperation who will only drag your name through the mud." Her eyes flashed. "Your father would have been appalled." At that, Travis's composure cracked. "Don't you dare bring my father into this," he growled. "I'm taking care of my sister's children the best way I know how, and Alexandra is part of that solution. If you can't accept it, you can leave." The aunt's eyebrows shot up in fury, but a pointed cough near the doorway interrupted them. They both turned to see a tall, bespectacled man with papers under his arm. Travis's lawyer, perhaps. He murmured something about urgent documents and stepped aside. The aunt straightened, smoothing her skirt with a brisk motion. "We'll speak again," she said icily before sweeping from the room. Alexandra, breath caught in her throat, retreated down a side corridor. She'd barely made it to the base of the staircase when she heard brisk footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw the aunt bearing down, eyes narrowed like a hawk. The older woman's voice echoed in the empty hall. "You, come here." Reluctantly, Alexandra obeyed, carefully keeping her expression neutral. The aunt looked her up and down as though assessing her worth. "I'm tired of the drama you bring," she said bluntly. "Whatever game you're playing, it ends now. Do you think Travis really wants you hanging around, or do you hope to manipulate him with personal entanglements?" A surge of panic and indignation rose in Alexandra's chest. She swallowed hard, steadied her voice. "I'm just doing my job, taking care of the children, that's all." A derisive snort escaped the aunt's lips. "Spare me. I've seen this before. House help who tries to weasel her way into the family. If you had any dignity, you'd resign before you cause more trouble." Her gaze flicked to Alexandra's midsection, as though suspecting a secret might be lurking there. "Save yourself the humiliation." Before Alexandra could gather a response, a new voice cut in. "That's enough!" Travis strode up, eyes blazing with a protective fury that Alexandra had never seen on his face before. He placed himself between the two women, glaring at his aunt. "You will not speak to her like that. Not here. Not anywhere." The aunt gave him a look dripping with scorn, but she held her tongue. Perhaps she recognized the danger in pushing him too far. With a rigid toss of her head, she marched away, heels clicking against marble until the echo vanished. Alexandra released a trembling breath. "Thank you," she said quietly, though relief warred with dread. She couldn't deny that the aunt's accusations cut close to her deepest fear, that her pregnancy might be viewed as a ploy rather than a responsibility that weighed on her heart. Travis turned to her, breathing still uneven. "I'm sorry you had to endure that. She's convinced everyone is either a threat or a scandal waiting to happen." He hesitated, then added, "I know you're not like that." A surge of emotion tightened her throat. For a moment, they stood close, far closer than was typical for employer and employee. She remembered the vulnerable confessions he'd shared about his sister, the quiet strength he needed to guard the children, and her own guilt at hiding a secret that could change everything. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Alexandra found Travis alone in the garden. The clouds overhead had parted, revealing a half-moon illuminating the lush hedges and flower beds. A soft breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the scent of damp earth. Travis stood by the fountain, gazing at the stone figure trickling water into the pool below. She approached slowly, footsteps quiet on the gravel path. He looked up, a hint of sadness flickering in his eyes. "I'm not proud of how often I lose my temper," he said. "But when I see my relatives attacking you and the children, something in me can't stay silent." Alexandra drew closer, daring to place a comforting hand on his arm. "They just want to control the narrative." She paused, battling her own nerves. Now might be the time to admit she was pregnant, though fear still squeezed her lungs. Could she really add that to his towering list of burdens? In a halting whisper, Travis began to speak about his sister's final days, how he felt he could have saved her from the accident if only he'd insisted she stay longer in the family home, or protected her from the relatives who preyed on her. His voice caught, and Alexandra's heart ached for him. She leaned in, wanting to console him, but weighed down by her own unresolved confession. Just then, as she opened her mouth to speak, the distant ring of a phone pierced the gentle night air. They both froze. Travis fished his phone from his pocket, scanning the screen in confusion. His face blanched. "It's from the hospital," he muttered, dread creeping into his tone. He answered, speaking in clipped, urgent sentences. Within moments, his expression turned grim. When he hung up, he met Alexandra's gaze with a shaken look. "Your grandmother's treatment has been cancelled," he said, voice taut. "The payment isn't going through. They're going to stop her care unless they receive the funds immediately." A chilly wind rattled the window panes of the mansion's foyer as Alexandra hurried across the marble floor, heart racing with dread. Travis had just delivered devastating news. Her grandmother's treatment had been cancelled for lack of payment. Her mind spun with fear for her grandmother's life and shame that she'd neglected the bills for so long, clinging to hope that she would earn enough money here. Now, everything teetered on the brink of collapse. She found an unoccupied corner near the grand staircase and pulled out her phone, voice trembling as she tried to reach the hospital. Between the endless ringtones and the occasional beep, her anxiety grew. Finally, a frazzled receptionist answered, politely informing Alexandra that unless they received the overdue fees soon, there'd be no choice but to halt all procedures. Alexandra's throat burned with unshed tears as she pleaded for more time. But the receptionist's words were careful and final. There were policies, and no exceptions. Disconnected, Alexandra pressed her phone to her chest, trying not to crumble right there in the mansion's echoing hall. How could she possibly pay these bills? Her earnings as a nanny weren't enough, and even if Travis might lend assistance, was she ready to ask for more help from a man whose own life was in turmoil? The weight of her guilt seemed unbearable. She needed to do something, fast. It was then she felt a wave of queasiness, a reminder of the new life growing inside her. Closing her eyes, she acknowledged there was no more delaying it. She had to speak up about the pregnancy. There was no way she could keep it under wraps, not with her grandmother's crisis compounding everything else. Straightening her shoulders, she set out to find Travis, heart pounding as if she were marching toward doom. She discovered him in his study, hunched over a laptop, his tie loosened and hair slightly disheveled. Stress had etched lines into his usually stoic features. When she softly called his name, he glanced up, relief and concern flickering in his gaze. "Any news from the hospital?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, swallowing a shaky breath. "They won't wait for much longer," she managed. "They need funds now, or they'll stop everything." Travis sat back, exhaling. "I'll help you," he said, voice firm though strain laced every word. "Let me talk to my accountant. We can—" "No, wait." Alexandra raised a hand, stopping him. The trembling in her fingers betrayed her tension. She could sense that if he donated the money without knowing the full truth, she'd feel indebted in a way that might haunt her. "You need to know something first. Something big." He nodded, concern deepening. She took a moment to collect herself, then admitted, "I'm pregnant." Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. "I found out at the clinic a little while ago, and it's triplets." The confession hung in the air, so thick that the nearby clock ticking felt deafening. Travis stared as though trying to process her words, emotions flickering too quickly to name. At length he ran a hand through his hair, struggling for composure. "Triplets," he repeated almost to himself. "Are you sure?" She offered a shaky nod. "The doctor ran tests. I haven't told anyone." A swirl of feelings crossed his face. Shock, confusion, maybe even a spark of something else. Before he could speak, a voice interrupted from the doorway. "Told him what?" They both turned to see Travis's aunt, mouth set in a sharp line, eyes flicking between them with razor-like suspicion. Instinctively, Alexandra's arms went around her midsection as if to shield her secret, but it was too late. The aunt stepped forward, gaze blazing. "What is this about?" she demanded, focusing on Alexandra's protective stance. "Are you pregnant?" Alexandra stiffened, her grip tightening. She couldn't find the words to reply, but her face must have said enough. Triumph flashed in the older woman's eyes, followed by a chilling hostility. "I knew it," she hissed, glaring at Travis. "This is precisely the scandal we feared. You hire a nobody to play nanny, and suddenly she's carrying a child? And triplets at that?" Travis gritted his teeth. "We don't know anything for certain," he shot back, though the aunt bulldozed on. "Oh, please," her sharp tone echoed in the study. "There's only one reason she'd keep something like this secret. She's trying to trap you, just like the last nanny who saw an opportunity and tried to twist it for personal gain." She advanced on Alexandra, voice dripping with contempt. Let me guess. You want him to hand over the family fortune? Is that it? Alexandra's cheeks burned with rage and shame, but also a raw feeling of betrayal. She hadn't expected acceptance, but to be painted as a conniving manipulator twisted a knife in her chest. I don't want any fortune, she managed, voice tight. I only want to save my grandmother. Travis placed himself between them, expression darkening. Stop it, he snapped at his aunt. We don't know all the details, and you have no right. I have every right to protect this family's reputation, the aunt retorted, lip curling. If she wants to stay under this roof, she can prove whose child that is. Paternity test, immediately, or else. The threat ignited a storm in Alexandra's mind. Even if Travis was the father, though that was the implication swirling in the aunt's accusations, Alexandra couldn't bear the thought of turning her situation into a spectacle of rumors and invasive questioning. She was already drowning in guilt for not telling Travis sooner, for hoping she could handle it all on her own. Now, with the aunt's ferocity, the future seemed even more precarious. Before Travis could intervene, the aunt spun on her heel, calling for Joe and a few other staff members. Soon the air brimmed with tension and swirling voices. The children, drawn by the uproar, peeked around a corner, eyes large with alarm. Alexandra's heart cracked at the sight of their fear. She wanted to pull them close, assure them everything would be okay, but she could barely stand upright as the aunt hurled ultimatum after ultimatum in Travis's face. A cacophony of arguments ensued, staff stepping back with guarded faces, the aunt shouting about scandal and legal ramifications. Joe hovered, uncertain whether to get involved or keep the peace. Mrs. Rhodes attempted to calm the screaming match but was overpowered by the family matriarch's fury. Tears burned in Alexandra's eyes. This was the last place she wanted the children to witness such chaos. Sucking in a trembling breath, she shook her head. I won't do this, she said, her quiet words somehow cutting through the noise. All heads swung in her direction. Travis's voice, taut with worry, found her. Alexandra. But she couldn't look at him without feeling an overwhelming surge of shame, for burdening him, for contributing to yet another scandal in this house. She locked eyes with the aunt instead, who wore a smug expression as though she'd won some twisted victory. I'm leaving, Alexandra murmured. Travis's face fell. No, don't let them drive you away. Let me sort this out. I'll pay for your grandmother's hospital bills. We can handle the press, the family, everything. Her tears finally slipped free. No, she whispered. I'm not dragging you into more chaos. You have enough on your plate. She swallowed the ache in her throat. I appreciate everything you've done, but I can't stay here. I can't force you to shoulder my problems, especially when they're about to explode like this. He reached out, but she pulled back. The uncle, who had just arrived in the corridor, snorted in derision. The aunt folded her arms, looking too satisfied. Alexandra shot one last glance at the children who watched her with heartbreak in their eyes. I'm so sorry, she managed to whisper. Then, with shaky steps, she fled the mansion, footsteps echoing behind her like a farewell she'd never planned to say. She barely remembered packing a small suitcase, numbness guiding her hands as she grabbed clothes and personal documents. In a daze, she ordered a taxi that took her away from the towering gates. The ride felt both horribly long and painfully brief. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, a silent promise that she'd find a way to manage somehow. Yet tears spilled over, and she didn't bother to hide them from the sympathetic driver, who glanced in the rear-view mirror but said nothing. The taxi deposited her at a modest motel in a nearby town. The neon sign buzzed overhead, throwing harsh pink light across the damp parking lot. Inside, the room smelled of stale air and cleaning products. She set her single bag down and sank onto the bed, the lonely hush crashing around her. Here, nobody knew her name or her troubles. The quiet might have been a relief if not for the pang in her heart. A part of her prayed that Travis would call or text, that he might rush in to say it was all a misunderstanding, that he'd found a miraculous way to quell his family's fury and keep her grandmother in treatment. But her phone remained stubbornly silent, no messages flashing across the screen. Exhausted, she dozed off for a while, only to be startled awake by the insistent buzz of her ringtone. She fumbled for her phone, heart leaping at the possibility that Travis might be on the line, offering some miraculous plan. Instead, she heard the familiar voice of a hospital staff member, urgent and grim. "Ms. Alexandra, I'm calling about your grandmother's condition," the person said. "It's worsened. We need immediate financial help. She's in critical need of further treatment, or I'm afraid things look very dire." The phone threatened to slip from her trembling hand. She pressed it to her ear, voice stuck in her throat. They'd warned her this might happen, but hearing it confirmed felt like a blow. Her grandmother lay in a hospital bed, alone, in increasing danger, and Alexandra had no immediate resources to save her. Alone in a small motel room, Alexandra receives a call from the hospital. Her grandmother's condition has worsened. She's in dire need of financial help, immediately. Alexandra's hands trembled around the phone as the nurse finished explaining her grandmother's critical state. Each word felt like another rock pressing onto her chest. She thanked the nurse in a broken whisper and hung up, the stale air of her motel room closing in as though it meant to suffocate her. She glanced around, taking in the faded wallpaper and flickering overhead light. This couldn't be where she stayed forever, not with her grandmother's life on the line and 3 babies growing inside her. She tried calling a few potential employers, cafes, babysitting gigs, anything that might hire her quickly enough to cover at least part of the hospital fees. But every conversation fizzled before it began. Some were wary of a pregnant applicant, others had no open positions. Desperation rose in her throat. She had no immediate plan, no savings, and no one she trusted enough to ask for money. The memory of Travis offering to help flashed through her mind, but she quickly pushed it away, unwilling to appear as though she were running back to him after all that had happened. Late that night, she found herself pacing the scuffed carpet, teeth chattering as the motel's thin walls let in the chill of autumn air. Her thoughts returned to the moment she'd fled the mansion, the children's stunned faces, Travis's outstretched hand. She missed them more than she could admit. Yet each time she pictured Travis, shame flooded back. She'd walked away to spare him more scandal, but now her grandmother was paying the price. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Travis discovered early the next morning that Alexandra had truly vanished. Mrs. Rhodes explained in hushed tones how Alexandra had rushed out, suitcase in hand. The children hovered in the hallway, confused and distraught. The older nephew demanded answers, tears brimming in his eyes as he asked where Alexandra had gone. Travis clenched his fists in frustration, anger roiling under his calm exterior. He knew exactly why she'd left. The vicious words of his aunt, the specter of a possible scandal. Worst of all, he felt he'd let Alexandra go without truly fighting for her. Word reached him that his aunt was gloating around the estate, telling staff that she'd exposed Alexandra's motives. Travis cornered her in the main drawing room, ignoring the shocked looks of distant cousins who happened to be visiting. "This has gone on long enough," he said, voice dangerously quiet. "Your constant interference has already driven away someone who matters to me and the children." The aunt lifted her chin. "Oh, so you admit she had you wrapped around her finger. Better she's gone before the family's name is dragged any further into disrepute." Travis's nostrils flared. "You don't speak for this family, and if you think I'm letting you meddle with my sister's children or my life any longer, you're sorely mistaken." Then he turned on his heel and marched off to his study, calling his lawyer. Within minutes, he set in motion a plan to protect his guardianship of his nephews, no matter what rumors the aunt tried to spread. He'd spent so long appeasing the family for the children's sake, but Alexandra's departure woke him to the fact that cowering to their demands wasn't really helping anyone. Later that day, after issuing firm instructions to the staff and ensuring the children were looked after, Travis drove to his corporate offices in the city. He called a press conference intending to squelch the swirling rumors once and for all. Cameras flashed as he stepped up to a row of microphones. Several reporters looked puzzled. Why would a normally reclusive businessman suddenly address them? "I have a statement regarding recent speculation about my personal life," he began, breath tight in his chest. "My family has endured a great loss and legal battles over my nephew's inheritance. Certain parties have tried to stir further scandal, targeting someone very dear to my family's well-being, our children's caretaker, Alexandra. Let me be clear. Any rumors regarding her motives are false. She has shown nothing but devotion and kindness." He continued, voice steady, acknowledging family disputes but refusing to feed the gossip about Alexandra's pregnancy. Instead, he focused on explaining that he would maintain guardianship of the children and that no outside pressures would force him to step down. The cameras captured his every word, and Travis prayed that somewhere, somehow, Alexandra might learn he was fighting for her, even if he couldn't reveal everything publicly. Meanwhile, at the motel, Alexandra found a TV news channel running footage of Travis's press conference. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her heartbeat rattling in her chest as the camera zoomed in on his serious, resolute face. She watched him defend her character without naming her, watched him clarify that he would stand firm against his relatives' manipulations. A swell of emotion rose in her throat. Was he really doing all this for the children? Or did it also mean he hadn't abandoned her? Her phone buzzed, startling her from her thoughts. She scrambled for it, hoping it was the hospital with better news. But the screen showed a private number. She hesitated, then answered. There was a pause, then a halting, familiar voice. "Travis." "Alexandra," he said, sounding distant and worn. I'm sorry. I know I have no right to ask you where you are. But please, can we talk?" For a long moment she couldn't form words. She recalled how she'd insisted on leaving to protect him, but hearing the strain in his voice twisted her heart. "I don't think that's a good idea," she finally managed, voice wavering. "I appreciate what you said at the press conference, but I can't burden you more, Travis." His breath crackled on the line. "I'm not giving up. I want to help you, no matter what. Please just promise me you'll stay safe." Tears pricked her eyes. She wanted to ask how the children were, to assure him she missed them, but the lump in her throat wouldn't budge. "Take care of them," she whispered, then hung up, instantly regretting it. But fear overshadowed regret. She was still pregnant, still broke, still uncertain if letting Travis in was the right choice. Hours later, as evening settled, she fought a losing battle to stay hopeful. A gentle knock on her motel door startled her. She opened it to find a courier standing there with a sealed envelope. "Are you Alexandra?" he asked, scanning a slip of paper for confirmation. "Special delivery." Puzzled, she signed for the envelope, heart thudding as she closed the door behind her. The envelope bore no sender name, just her own. Inside, she discovered documents from a medical fund. Skimming the pages, her breath caught. It appeared to be registration for a comprehensive treatment plan at her grandmother's hospital, fully covered, courtesy of a newly established trust. Stamped at the bottom was Travis's formal signature. She almost sank to the floor with relief and heartbreak. He was paying for her grandmother's care, even though she'd refused him. Sobs swelled in her chest, equal parts gratitude and guilt. How had he managed to set this up so quickly, especially with all his own battles raging? In that moment, she understood he wasn't letting her go so easily. He was risking his position with the family, risking more rumors, risking everything to protect her and the babies growing inside her, whether or not she wanted to accept his help. Tears stained the papers as she read the final line of the trust agreement, an explicit guarantee that her grandmother's treatment would continue uninterrupted. Her phone pinged once more. A simple text lit the screen. "I'm not giving up on you or on them." Travis. Staring at the phone, her thoughts churned. He was fighting for her. But could she truly let him back into her life, knowing how fiercely his family would resist? Could she trust that this wasn't just pity or an attempt to maintain control? Her heart pounded with the sudden realization that she might not be alone in this after all. A hospital nurse handed Alexandra a sealed envelope sent by courier. Inside was a medical fund registration with Travis's signature, indicating her grandmother's bills are now covered. Alexandra realizes Travis is fighting for her, but can she trust him? Alexandra stood in the hospital corridor, gripping the envelope of medical fund papers. Machines beeped behind the closed doors of her grandmother's room, a rhythmic reminder of how fragile life could be. Thanks to Travis's intervention, her grandmother was receiving the care she so desperately needed, but Alexandra's heart still thudded with uncertainty. Outside, the late afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, warming her face yet failing to soothe the turmoil churning inside her. She took a breath and pushed open the door to her grandmother's room, where a nurse was adjusting the IV drip. Her grandmother looked frail, but her eyes brightened when she saw Alexandra. Drawing near, Alexandra took the older woman's hand, relief flooding in that at least now the hospital wouldn't turn them away. She stayed a long while, stroking her grandmother's fingers and murmuring reassurances. Somewhere in her mind, a small voice reminded her she had to confront the reality she'd left behind at the mansion. That night, as Alexandra settled into a chair in the waiting area, Travis called. His name glowed on the phone's screen, the letters enough to make her heart pound. She hesitated, then answered. "Your grandmother?" he asked without preamble, voice thick with concern. "She's doing better." Alexandra swallowed. "They're continuing treatment thanks to you. I don't know how to repay—" "You don't need to," Travis interrupted, a quiet intensity in his tone. "Just tell me where you are. Let me come see you. We can sort through all of this together." Alexandra twisted the fabric of her jacket. Even after everything, the family drama, the accusations, her abrupt departure, he was still there, offering steady support. "I'm at the hospital," she finally said. "You can come, but maybe it's best we talk outside, away from prying eyes." He agreed. 20 minutes later, she saw him appear through the automatic doors, shoulders set, eyes searching. A lump rose in her throat. She half expected to feel shame or fear, but a new warmth broke through like dawn light after a long, dark night. As soon as he spotted her, he crossed the lobby in quick strides. They stepped out onto a small terrace off the hospital's side wing, a place where patients and families sometimes took a breath of fresh air. Evening had settled in, the sky tinged with dusky purples and faint stars. The hum of distant traffic filled the silence between them. "Thank you," she said, voice trembling, "for paying for her treatment, for—" He lifted a hand gently, stopping her. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat, and it's not just for you," he added softly. "It's for our babies, too. They need a grandmother around, don't they?" Emotion caught in her throat. She nodded, tears brimming, and Travis drew her into a careful embrace. For a moment her fears dissolved, replaced by the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. They stood like that until a staff member passed by, offering them a polite smile that reminded them they were in a public space. Travis cleared his throat, stepping back. "We have a lot to settle. My aunt is still plotting ways to undermine my guardianship. And as for you, I want to protect you from her accusations." Alexandra fiddled nervously with a loose thread on her sleeve. "I don't want to be the cause of more conflict. Your uncle, your aunt, they're all watching." A flicker of determination lit Travis's eyes. "Let them watch," he said, his voice quiet yet firm. "I've collected enough evidence of their misconduct, financial irregularities, mismanagement of certain trust funds. They won't be in a position to blackmail me or threaten you once I bring this to light." Her eyes widened. "You've really gathered proof?" He nodded, gaze unwavering. "I was hesitant to use it before. I thought playing nice might keep the peace for the children's sake, but I can't let them hurt you or the kids any longer." In that instant, Alexandra realized just how far he was willing to go, not just for the boys, but also for her. She was about to respond when her phone buzzed, the screen illuminating an update from the nurse about her grandmother. She sighed with relief, reading that her grandmother was stable enough to rest for the night. Fresh tears blurred her vision, and Travis squeezed her shoulder. "I'll drive you home," he said. "And by home, I mean the mansion. Unless you'd rather stay here, in a motel, alone? Because you're not alone. Not anymore." She closed her eyes, exhaling the fear that had kept her running. I'll come," she whispered. "I want to see the kids, and I can't keep hiding." That night, they returned to the estate under a sky scattered with stars, the driveway lamps guiding them through the iron gates. When Alexandra stepped inside, the house felt different, less like a looming threat, more like a place that might become a haven if given the chance. Joe stood at the entrance, arms folded, but he offered a nod instead of a scowl. Mrs. Rhodes appeared with a relieved smile, ushering Alexandra in and mentioning in hushed excitement that the children had asked about her non-stop. But the real turning point came the following morning, when Travis gathered the family and his legal team in the grand drawing room. Alexandra lingered in a corner, observing the tense meeting. Papers were laid out, references to suspicious financial transactions scrawled in black ink. The aunt spluttered and fumed while the uncle fidgeted with his tie, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "I have no desire to drag this family name through the mud," Travis said calmly, though his eyes flashed. "But if you continue to threaten my guardianship of the children or Alexandra's place here, these documents will be handed over to the authorities." There was a momentary standoff, the aunt sputtering accusations about ungrateful heirs, the uncle half rising from his seat in protest. But the harsh truth of the evidence forced them to falter. One by one they backed down. Alexandra watched with equal parts awe and relief. In the days that followed, Travis worked tirelessly to tie up the loose ends, ensuring the nephew's inheritance remained secured, finalizing the new medical fund for Alexandra's grandmother, and formally acknowledging the triplets as his heirs as well. Although rumors would likely buzz, no one in the estate dared question the official documents he circulated. The older nephews, joyous at Alexandra's return, clung to her happily, as if they sensed a weight had finally lifted from the household. Soon after, Travis invited her to walk in the garden. The late afternoon sun painted golden stripes across the manicured lawn, the same garden where so many tense moments once took place. Now it felt renewed. At an ancient oak tree by a small fountain, Travis turned to her. He spoke about how the children had regained their laughter and how her grandmother's recovery gave him hope that healing truly was possible. Then, with tenderness she'd only glimpsed before, he confessed his feelings for her, stammering a bit as he declared he couldn't imagine life without her. Emotions brimmed over in Alexandra's chest. Her cheeks flushed as she admitted her own love, shy and unsure but undeniably real. Travis slipped a simple ring onto her finger, the diamonds catching the last rays of sunlight. "We'll do this in our own way," he said, voice shaky with nervous excitement. "Something small, something meaningful." They decided on a modest ceremony in the mansion's side garden, a place that overlooked the children's favorite play area and the old oak tree. On the day of the celebration, an archway of fresh flowers stood amid rows of neatly arranged chairs. Family and staff who supported them gathered, forming a small but warm crowd. Even Joe allowed a faint smile in the background. The two nephews dressed in matching suits, proudly carrying small bouquets of flowers. Alexandra's grandmother, steadied by a wheelchair but smiling radiantly, occupied the front row, tears glistening in her eyes. Alexandra walked down a short aisle, heart pounding at the sight of Travis waiting beneath the flower arch. The old tensions in the house seemed to dissolve in the sunshine, leaving only a sense of renewal. The staff dabbed at tears and the children giggled with excitement, basking in the day's happiness. As they exchanged vows, Alexandra felt the triplets flutter inside her, as though confirming this was the home they too had been waiting for. When the officiant pronounced them joined, gentle applause rippled through the garden. Travis pulled her close, pressing a loving kiss to her temple. The nephews cheered, bounding over to cling to their legs in one big family embrace. Mrs. Rhodes smiled through tears, and even the stoic Joe clapped respectfully from the sidelines. Later, everyone gathered at a simple reception under the oak tree, a soft breeze rustling the leaves overhead. Laughter mingled with the scent of roses, and relief flowed through the air like a gentle current. Alexandra looked around, her grandmother chatting with Travis's grandfather, the children dashing about with ribbons, the staff exchanging joyful looks. She squeezed Travis's hand in grateful wonder. He leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "Sometimes," he murmured, "it takes a lifetime of storms to find the right shore." At those words, Alexandra's heart soared with the certainty that they had, at last, arrived where they belonged. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.